The treatise on the provisions for enlightenment, the Bodhisambhara Śastra by Ārya Nāgārjuna, translated into Chinese by the Great Sui Dynasty's South Indian Tripiṭaka master Dharmagupta. English translation by Bhikshu Dharmamitra. Now, in the presence of all the Buddhas, with palms pressed together, I bow down my head in reverence. I shall explain here, in accordance with the teachings, the provisions essential for the Bodhi of the Buddhas. How would one be able to describe without omission all of the provisions for the realization of Bodhi? This could only be accomplished by the Buddhas themselves, for they exclusively have realized the boundless enlightenment. The boundless qualities of a Buddha's body are rooted in the provisions essential to enlightenment. Therefore, the provisions for enlightenment themselves have no bounds. I shall then explain but a lesser portion of them. I render reverence to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. It is all such Bodhisattvas as these to whom one should next make offerings after the Buddhas. Since it is the mother of the Bodhisattvas, it is also the mother of the Buddhas. The prajna Pāramitā is foremost among the provisions essential for enlightenment. Because giving, moral virtue, patience, vigor, meditation, and the others following from these five all arise from the perfection of wisdom, they are included within the Pāramitās. These 6 Pāramitās encompass the provisions essential for Bodhi. They are comparable in this to empty space, which entirely envelopes all things. There is also the idea proposed by another master, that as for the provisions for enlightenment, truth, relinquishment, cessation, and wisdom, these 4 bases subsume them all. The great compassion penetrates to the marrow of one's bones. Thus one serves as a refuge for every being. With a feeling as strong as a father's regard for his only son, one's kindness extends universally to all beings. If one brings to mind the qualities of a Buddha, or hears of a Buddha's spiritual transformations, one becomes purified through one's admiration and joyfulness. This is what is meant by the great sympathetic joy. In his relations with beings, the Bodhisattva should not allow himself to forsake them. As befits the abilities determined by his powers, he should always strive to draw them in. From the very beginning, the Bodhisattva should accord with the power of his abilities and use skillful means to instruct beings, causing them to enter the great vehicle. Even if one taught beings as numerous as the Ganges sands, so that they were caused to gain the fruit of arahatship, still, by instructing but a single person to enter the great vehicle, one would generate merit superior to that. Instructing through resort to the Shravaka vehicle, or through resort to the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, is undertaken where, on account of lesser abilities, beings are unable to accept instruction in the great vehicle. Where even when relying on Shravaka or Pratyeka Buddha vehicles, in addition to the great vehicle teachings, there are those who still cannot accept any such instruction, one should strive to establish them in merit-creating situations. If there be persons unable to accept instruction conducing either to the heavens or to liberation, favor them through bestowing present life benefits. Then, as befits one's powers, one should draw them in. Where, with regard to particular beings, a bodhisattva has no conditions through which to instruct them, he should draw forth the great kindness and compassion, and should refrain from abandoning them. Drawing them in through giving, through explaining Dharma, through listening to them discuss the Dharma, or through endeavors beneficial to them. Those are skillful means through which to attract them. In that which is done for the benefit of beings, do not succumb to either weariness or negligence. Bring forth vows for the sake of realizing Bodhi. Benefiting the world is just benefiting self. Entering the extremely profound Dharma realm, one extinguishes mental discriminations. As they are devoid of any useful function, in all contexts, one naturally abides in equanimity. Personal gain, reputation, praise, and happiness, one refrains from attachment to any of these 4 points, nor do their opposites present any sort of obstacle. This is the sort of conduct comprising equanimity. So long as he has not yet gained irreversibility, in the bodhisattvas striving for Bodhi, he should be as intensely diligent in practice as someone whose turban has caught on fire. Thus it is that those bodhisattvas, when striving for the realization of Bodhi, should not rest in their practice of vigor, for they have shouldered such a heavy burden. Until one develops the great compassion and the patiences, even though he may have gained irreversibility, the bodhisattva is still subject to a form of dying, occurring through the arising of negligence. The grounds of the Shravakas or the Pratyeka Buddhas, if entered, constitute death for him, because he would thereby sever the roots of the bodhisattva's understanding and awareness. At the prospect of falling into the hell realms, the bodhisattva would not be struck with fright. The grounds of the Shravakas and the Pratyeka Buddhas do provoke great terror in him. It is not the case that falling into the hell realms would create an ultimate obstacle to Bodhi. If one fell onto the grounds of the Shravakas or Pratyeka Buddhas, that would create an ultimate obstacle. Just as is said of one who loves long life, that he is frightened at the prospect of being beheaded, so too the grounds of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas should provoke in one this very sort of fear. As for not produced and not destroyed, and neither unproduced nor undestroyed, one denies assertion of both and neither. So too in cases involving emptiness and non-emptiness. No matter which existent Dharma one encounters, one persists therein in the contemplation, remaining unmoving. That is the unproduced Dharma's patience. It is based on the severance of all mental discriminations. Once one gains this patience, one immediately receives the prediction: you will definitely become a Buddha. It is then that one achieves irreversibility. Those bodhisattvas already dwelling at the stage of immovability have gained irreversible wisdom, cognizing all Dharma's reality. As their wisdom cannot be turned back by two vehicles adherents, it is only at this point that they are designated as irreversible. Until the bodhisattva has gained the solid samadhis on the ground of all Buddha's direct presence, he should not allow any negligence to arise. The solid samadhis on the ground of all Buddha's direct presence serve for the bodhisattva as his father, whereas the great compassion and patiences serve as his mother. As for the perfection of wisdom being his mother, and skillful means being his father, it is because the one gives him birth and the other supports him, that they are said to be the Bodhisattva's father and mother. With but a lesser accumulation of merit, one remains unable to realize Bodhi. Only by collecting merit more massive than 100 sumerus can one succeed in achieving that realization. Although one may perform but a minor meritorious deed, even in this one possesses a skillful means. Taking the sphere of all beings as the object, one should generate a mental transformation of the conditions, where one reflects, may whatever actions I undertake always be done for the welfare of beings. Who could measure the merit of he whose mental actions are of this sort? Where one isn't constrained by fondness for relatives, retinue, body, life, or wealth, where one isn't held back by desiring pleasure in Ishvara's heavens, Brahma world heavens, or any other heavens, where one isn't constrained even by coveting nirvana, where one's actions are done for the sake of other beings, and where in all this one thinks only for the welfare of beings, who then could measure the vastness of his merit? When for those of the world without refuge or protection, he rescues and protects them from their bitter afflictions, when he raises forth such thoughts and actions as these, who could possibly measure his merit? It would be so even in according with the perfection of wisdom, or only the moment of tugging forth the stream of cow's milk. If one acted thus for a month, or for many more months, who could possibly measure his merit? Where one recites to himself, or teaches to others, those profound sutras praised by the Buddhas. Also, where one interprets and explains them for others. These are the basis of an accumulation of merit. Through influencing countless beings to generate the Bodhi resolve, one's treasury of merit increases yet more, and one becomes bound to gain the ground of immovability. Where one follows in turning what the Buddha turned, the wheel of the supreme Dharma, thus clearing away all of the noxious thorns. This creates the Bodhisattva's treasury of merit, where, to benefit beings and make them happy, one would endure even the sufferings of the great hells. How much the more the other lesser sufferings? It is as if Bodhi lay in the palm of one's own right hand, where whatever one does, it is not for oneself, but solely to benefit beings and make them happy, because this all arises from the great compassion. It is as if Bodhi lay in the palm of one's own right hand, where wisdom is such that one abandons frivolous discourse, where vigor is such that one abandons indolence, and where giving is such that one abandons miserliness. It is as if Bodhi lay in the palm of one's own right hand, where meditation is such that one is free of reliances or ideation, where morality is such that its practice is perfect and unmixed, and where patience is such that one realizes non-production. It is as if Bodhi lay in the palm of one's own right hand. In the abodes of all those who have gained the right enlightenment, now abiding throughout the 10 directions, I appear there in the presence of them all, and completely lay forth all my unwholesome deeds. Where there are Buddhas who have realized Bodhi in those realms throughout the 10 directions, but they have not yet proclaimed the Dharma, I entreat them to turn the Dharma wheel. Wherever there are those possessing the right enlightenment, abiding in the present era in the 10 directions realms, but now on the verge of relinquishing their lives and actions, I bow down my head in reverence, beseeching them to remain. Wherever they may be any beings who, by acts of body, mouth, or mind, have created any merit through giving, moral virtue, and so forth, including through cultivation of meditation. No matter whether they be Aryas or common persons, and no matter whether its creation is past, present, or future, I am moved to rejoice in all of that accumulated merit. If all of the merit I have created could be formed into a single ball, I would bestow it on all beings through dedicating it to causing them to gain the right enlightenment. As for these actions I undertake in repenting transgressions, in entreating and beseeching, in rejoicing in others' merit, and so on, including in dedicating all merit to realizing Bodhi, one should realize they accord with all Buddha's own practices. These acts of confession and repentance of my bad karmic deeds, of entreating the Buddhas, of rejoicing in others' merit, and so on, including dedicating all merit to realizing Bodhi, these all accord with the teachings set forth by the Victorious One. Kneeling down with the right knee touching the ground, and the upper robe arranged to bear one's shoulder, 3 times each day and 3 times each night, press the palms together and proceed in this manner. The merit created in even a single instance of doing this, if manifest in material form, would be so immense that even a Ganges sands of great chiliocosms would still be unable to contain it. Having brought forth the initial resolve in relations with minor bodhisattvas, one should bring forth for them the veneration and cherishing comparable to that felt for the guru and parents. Although a bodhisattva may have committed transgressions, one should still not speak about them, how much the less so where there is no truth to the matter. One should utter praises only where they are grounded in truth. Where someone has vowed to become a Buddha, and one wishes to prevent his retreat from that resolve, reveal the way with such clarity he brims with intense vigor, and cause him to be filled with delight. Where one hasn't yet understood extremely profound scriptures, one must not claim they were not spoken by a Buddha. If one makes statements of this sort, one suffers the most bitter and horrible of karmic retributions. If the karmic offenses generating non-intermittent retributions were all put together to form a single ball, and were compared to one formed from the above 2 offenses, they would not amount to even the smallest fraction thereof. One should skillfully cultivate the 3 gates to liberation. The first is emptiness, the next is signlessness, and the third is wishlessness. Because they have no self-existent nature, phenomena are empty. If already empty, how could one establish any characteristic signs? Since all characteristic signs are themselves in a state of cessation, what could there be in them that the wise might wish for? When cultivating the mindful awareness of these, one draws close to the paths leading into nirvana. Do not bear in mind anything not resulting in a Buddha's body, and in that matter, one must not allow any negligence. In this matter of nirvana, I must not immediately invoke its realization. One should initiate this sort of resolve, for one must succeed in ripening the perfection initiates of wisdom. This very sort of intention, just as an archer might shoot his arrows upwards, causing each in succession to strike the one before. There are beings who have become inured to attachment, so none are allowed throughout to fall. Time's long night, just so it is and in present actions as well. Their coursing the emptiness of the gates to liberation regarding characteristic signs releases the arrows is in every case due to confusion wrought by delusion. Arrows are continuously held aloft, and holding so none views, are allowed to fall back. One explains the Dharma, nirvana. So such errors might be eliminated. I shall not forsake beings. One first generates but rather shall continue on for the sake of benefiting and thenceforth beings. Ensures that his practice corresponds thereto. The Bodhisattva benefits beings and yet does not perceive the existence of any being. This in itself is the most difficult of all endeavors, and is such a rarity as to be inconceivable. Although one may have entered the right and definite position, and one's practice may accord with the gates of liberation, because one has not yet fulfilled one's original vows, one refrains from proceeding to the realization of nirvana. Where one has not yet reached the definite position, one holds himself back through the power of skillful means, because one has not yet fulfilled his original vows. In this case, too, he refrains from realization of nirvana. Though one abides in the ultimate renunciation for cyclic existence, he nonetheless confronts cyclic existence directly. Though one maintains faith and happiness in nirvana, he nonetheless turns his back on realization of nirvana. One should dread the afflictions, but should not end the afflictions. To gather the manifold forms of goodness, one should use blocking methods to fend off afflictions. For the Bodhisattva, afflictions accord with his nature. He is not one who takes nirvana as his very nature. It is not the case that the burning up of the afflictions allows one to generate the seed of Bodhi. As for the predictions bestowed on those other beings, these predictions involved specific causal circumstances. They were solely a function of the Buddha's artfulness in taking the perfection of skillful means to the far shore. Similes for their plight reference empty space, lotus flowers, precipitous cliffs, and a deep abyss. Their realms bar it. Analogies cite non-virility and kachamani, with an additional comparison made to burnt seeds. All of the treatises, as well as the specialized skills, the occult and mundane sciences, and the various trades, because they bring benefit to the world, one brings them forth and establishes them. Adapting to beings amenable to instruction, to their worlds, rebirth destinies, and birth circumstances. As befits one's reflections, one goes directly to them, and through power of vows takes birth among them. In the midst of all sorts of circumstances rife with evil, and when among beings prone to guileful flattery and deceit, one should don one's sturdy armor. One must not yield to either loathing or fear. One equips oneself with supremely pure intentions, does not resort to guileful flattery or deception, reveals the wrongs of his karmic offenses, and conceals his many good deeds. One purifies the karma of body and mouth, and also purifies the karma of the mind. Cultivating observance of all passages in the moral code training, one must not allow any omissions or diminishment in this. One establishes himself in right mindfulness, focuses on the object condition, and stills his thought in solitude. Having put mindfulness to use as a guard, the mind becomes free of any obstructive thoughts. When discriminating thoughts arise, one should realize which are good and which are unwholesome, should forsake any which are not good, and extensively cultivate those which are good. If the mind trained on the object becomes scattered, one should focus one's mindful awareness, return it to that object, and whenever movement occurs, immediately cause it to halt. One should refrain from laxity and from wrong attachment, cultivated with intensity, for they make it impossible to maintain concentration. One should therefore remain constant in right cultivation. Even were one to take up the vehicle of the Shravakas or the vehicle of the Pratyeka Buddhas, and hence practice solely for one's own benefit, one would still not relinquish the enduring practice of vigor. How much the less could it be that a great man, committed to liberate both himself and all others, might somehow fail to generate a measure of vigor 1,000 kotis times greater. As for cultivating some other practice half the time, or simultaneously practicing some other path, one should not do this when cultivating meditative concentration. One should rather focus exclusively on a single objective condition. One must not indulge any covetousness regarding the body, and must not cherish even one's own life. Even were one to allow any protectiveness toward his body, it is but a dharma bound in the end to rot away. One must never develop a covetous attachment to offerings, reverence from others, or fame. Rather, one should strive diligently to fulfill one's vows, acting with the urgency of one whose turban has caught fire. Acting resolutely and immediately, pull forth the supreme benefit. In this, one cannot wait for tomorrow. Tomorrow is too distant a time, for how can one ensure survival even for the blink of an eye? Having established oneself in right livelihood, when eating, it is as if consuming the flesh of a cherished son. One must not indulge in either affection for or disapproval of whatever food one has taken for the meal. For what purpose has one left the home life? Have I finished what is to be done or not? Reflecting now on whether or not one is doing the work, doing so as described in the 10 Dharmas Sutra. Contemplate conditioned phenomena as impermanent, as devoid of self, and as devoid of anything belonging to a self. One must become aware of and withdraw from all forms of demonic karmic activity. Generate energetic diligence in order to cultivate the roots, powers, limbs of enlightenment, bases of spiritual powers, right severances, the path, and the 4 stations of mindfulness. The mind may serve as a source for the repeated generation of good deeds bestowing benefit and happiness, or it may instead serve as the root of all sorts of evil and turbidity. One should make it the focus of skillful analytic contemplation. From one day to the next, what increase has occurred in my cultivation of good dharmas? Also, what diminishment has occurred in this? Those should be the contemplations of utmost concern. Whenever one observes someone else experiencing an increase in offerings, reverences, or reputation, even the most subtle thoughts of stinginess and jealousy should never be indulged. One should not cherish any aspect of the objective realms, but rather should act as if dull-witted, blind, mute, and deaf. Still, when timely, respond by roaring the lion's roar, frightening off the non-Buddhist deer. In welcoming them on arrival and escorting them off as they go, one should be reverential toward those worthy of veneration. In all endeavors associated with the Dharma, one should follow along, participate, and contribute assistance. One rescues and liberates beings bound to be killed. One's goodness increases and never decreases. One well cultivates karmic works involving the sciences and skills, training in them oneself while also teaching them to others. Adopt all of the supremely good dharmas through persistent and solid practice. Cultivate the four means of attraction, making gifts of robes and food and drink. Do not turn away from those begging for alms. Facilitate the uniting of close relatives. Prevent estrangement between those of the same clan. Make gifts of dwellings and of material possessions as well. As for one's father, mother, relatives, and friends, provide them circumstances befitting their station. Wherever one has given them such a suitable situation, treat them as supreme and independent sovereigns. Although there may be yet others who are servants, one speaks to them with goodness and, in effect, adopts them. One should accord them the highest esteem and provide them with medicines and treatment for all illnesses. Be the first to act, taking the lead in good karmic deeds, speaking with smooth and sublime words, being skillful in discourse guided by right intention, and having no one above or below to whom gifts are not given. Avoid any harm to the retinue of others. Instead, regard beings with the eye of kindness. Neither may one course in disapproving thoughts. Instead, treat everyone as a good relative or friend. One should accord with the words he speaks, following them straight away with concordant actions. If one acts immediately in accordance with his words, others will be inclined then to develop faith. One should support and protect the Dharma, and should discover any instances of neglect, even going so far as to build canopies graced by gold and jewels, spreading over and covering the chaityas. For those wishing to obtain a maiden mate, see to her adornment and assist in her presentation. Speak to the parties about the qualities of the Buddha, and then give prayer beads gleaming in varying hues. Create images of the Buddha, sitting upright atop supremely fine lotus blossoms, and cultivate common delight and happiness through adherence to the 6 dharmas of community harmony. Of those who may be given offerings, none are not given offerings. Even for the sake of preserving one's life, one still does not slander the Dharma spoken by the Buddha or the person who expounds the Dharma. Gold and jewels are distributed among the teaching masters, and also among the chaityas of teaching masters. If there are those who forget what is to be recited, one assists their remembrance, enabling them to stay free of error. When one has not yet reflected on the right course of action, one must not be impulsive and must not simply emulate others. As for the non-Buddhists, gods, dragons, and spirits, one must not invest one's faith in any of them. One's mind should be like Vajra, able to penetrate all dharmas. One's mind should also be like a mountain, remaining unmoved in any circumstance. Delight in world-transcending discourse, and do not take pleasure in worldly words. Personally adopt all manner of meritorious qualities. One should then influence others to adopt them as well. Cultivate the 5 bases of liberation. Cultivate the 10 reflections on impurity. The 8 realizations of great men should also be the focus of analytic contemplation and cultivation. The heavenly ear, the heavenly eye, the basis of spiritual powers, the cognition of others' thoughts, and the cognition of past lives and abodes. One should cultivate purification of these 5 spiritual abilities. The 4 bases of spiritual powers comprise their root. They are zeal, vigor, mental focus, and contemplative reflection. The 4 immeasurables govern them. They are kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. The 4 elements are like poisonous serpents. The 6 sense faculties are like an empty village. The 5 aggregates are like assassins. One should contemplate them in this way. Esteem the Dharma and the masters of Dharma, and also relinquish any stinginess with the Dharma. The instructing masters must not be tight-fisted or secretive, and those listening must not be mentally scattered or confused. Free of arrogance and free of hopes, motivated solely by thoughts of compassion and pity, with reverent and respectful mind, expound the Dharma for the community. Be insatiable in learning, and always recite and retain what has been learned. Do not deceive any among the venerable fields of merit. Moreover, cause one's instructors to be delighted. One should not pay visits to the houses of others with a mind cherishing reverence or offerings. One must not take up study and recitation of worldly texts for the sake of debating challenging topics. One must not be provoked by hatefulness or anger into defaming any bodhisattva. As for dharmas not yet received or learned, one must not initiate slanders in those cases either. In order to cut off arrogance and pride, one should abide in the 4 lineage bases of the Ārya. One must not course in disapproval of others, and must not allow oneself to become conceited. Whether or not someone has actually committed a transgression, one must not reveal his situation to others. Do not seek out the errors and faults of anyone else. Rather, one should become aware of one's own errors. One should refrain from biased judgments and doubting in fathoming the Buddha and the Dharma of the Buddhas. Even though a Dharma may be extremely difficult to believe, one should nonetheless maintain faith in it. Even though one might be put to death for speaking the truth, or might be forced to abdicate the throne of a universal monarch, or even that of a king among the gods, one should still utter only truthful speech. Even if beaten, cursed, or terrorized with death threats or captivity, one must not hate or condemn others, but should instead reflect, "This is all the product of my own karmic offenses. This has happened as a result of karmic retribution." One should, with the most ultimate respect and affection, provide offerings in support of one's father and mother. Also, supply the needs of and serve the upadhyayas, while extending reverence to the acharyas as well. When, for those who place their faith in the Shravaka vehicle, or those dedicated to the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, one discourses on the most profound of dharmas, this, for a bodhisattva, is an error. When, for believers in the profound great vehicle teachings, one discourses to those beings on the Shravaka or Pratyeka Buddha vehicles, this too is an error for him. So too, where some superior person comes seeking the Dharma, but one delays and fails to provide him with the teachings. So too, where, on the contrary, one takes in wrongdoers or delegates responsibilities to those who are untrustworthy. One must abandon the errors mentioned above. As for such herein described meritorious practices as the duttas, one ought to become knowledgeable about them, and then incorporate them into one's own practice. Regard all equally in one's thoughts. Speak equally for all. Be uniformly equal in establishing all others in goodness, and influence them all equally to accord with what is right. Thus one refrains from making distinctions between any beings. One works for the sake of Dharma and not for self-benefit. One works to develop meritorious qualities, not for renown. One wishes to liberate beings from suffering, and does not wish merely to ensure his own happiness. With purposes kept secret, one seeks fruition in one's works. When the results of one's merit-generating endeavors come forth, even then, one applies them to the ripening of the many, while abandoning preoccupation with one's own concerns. Grow close to good spiritual friends, specifically to the masters of Dharma, to the Buddhas, to those who encourage one to leave the home life, and to those who are seekers of alms. Those who ground themselves in worldly treatises, those who exclusively seek worldly wealth, those with Pratyeka Buddha vehicle faith and understanding, and those devoted to the Shravaka vehicle. As for these 4 types of unwholesome spiritual friends, the Bodhisattva should be aware of them as such. There are, however, other circumstances one should seek out. This refers specifically to the 4 great treasuries: the emergence of Buddhas, hearing the perfections explained, being able in the presence of a master of Dharma to behold him with unobstructed mind, and happily pursuing cultivation in a place of solitude. Abide in a manner comparable to earth, water, fire, wind, and space, remaining thus uniformly equal under all circumstances in providing benefit to all beings. One should skillfully reflect upon the meanings and diligently progress in the uses of the dharanis. One must never create any sort of obstruction to those seeking to hear the Dharma. When embroiled in the afflictions, be able to overcome them. Relinquish the lesser instances, retaining not a trace. Regarding the 8 cases involving indolence, one should cut all of those off as well. Do not covet what is not one's lot, for unprincipled covetousness will not bring satisfaction. Influence all who have become estranged to reconcile, whether or not they are one's own relations. The wise must not base their practice on getting at the emptiness in what is intrinsically empty. In the case of one determined to get at that emptiness itself, that wrong is even more extreme than viewing the body as a self. By sweeping and finishing floors, by providing adornments, by furnishing many varieties of drums and music, and by offering fragrances, flower garlands, and other gifts, contribute offerings to the chaityas. Create all sorts of lantern wheels as offerings to the chaityas and their buildings. Provide canopies as well as sandals, horse-drawn carriages, sedan chairs, and the like. One should especially find delight in the Dharma, and be happy knowing what is gained through faith in the Buddha. Delight in providing for and serving the monastic Sangha, while also finding happiness through listening to right Dharma. They do not arise in the past, they do not abide in the present, they do not go forward into the future. Contemplate all dharmas in this manner. Give to beings whatsoever is fine, and do not wish that they bestow anything fine in return. One should prefer it be solely oneself who endures suffering, while not favoring oneself in the enjoyment of happiness. Although replete with karmic rewards from immense merit, the mind should not become lofty or overwhelmed with delight. Although one may be as poverty-stricken as a hungry ghost, one should still not become downcast or overcome with distress. Accord the most ultimate degree of esteem to those already accomplished in learning. Inspire those as yet unlearned to devote themselves to study. One should not behave in a manner belittling them. Revere those perfect in observance of the moral precepts, and influence those who break precepts to take on the precepts. Draw close to those perfect in wisdom, and influence those who act foolishly to abide in wisdom. The sufferings of cyclic existence are of many kinds, involving birth, aging, death, and the wretched destinies. One should not be frightened by the fearsomeness of these. One must instead subdue demons and knowledge rooted in evil. Amass every form of merit in the lands of all the Buddhas. Bring forth vows and proceed with vigor, so that everyone may succeed in reaching them. Even in the midst of all dharmas, one is constant in not seizing on them, thus coursing along in equanimity. One takes on the burden, wishing to bear it on forth, proceeding in this manner for the sake of all beings. Abide in the right contemplation of all dharmas, as devoid of self and as devoid of anything belonging to a self. Even so, one must not relinquish the great compassion or one's reliance on the great kindness. As for that which is superior even to using every sort of gift in making offerings to the Buddha, the Bhagawan, what sort of action might that be? This refers specifically to making offerings of Dharma. If one preserves the Bodhisattva canon, even to the point of gaining realization of the Dharanis, if one enters into and reaches the bottom of Dharma's source, this is what constitutes the offering of Dharma. One should rely upon the meaning. One must not cherish only the various flavors. In the path of the profound Dharma, one enters with skill and must not fall prey to negligence. One cultivates these provisions in this manner for kalpas as numerous as the Ganges sands, doing so sometimes as a monastic, sometimes as a householder. Thus one will succeed in perfecting the right enlightenment.